Good afternoon and welcome, dear friends, to the CEC live lecture session. And in today's session we are taking a series that is ecology series. In this series, today's topic is ecosystem development. To discuss this topic with us in studios we have Dr. V.S. Rawat. Dr. Rawat is Assistant Professor in Department of Geology in Hindu College of Delhi University. Dear friends, before starting this lecture, let me remind you that if you have any questions and queries regarding this ongoing session, you can call us in the last 10 minutes of this lecture on our toll-free number. And for that, please write down our toll-free number, that is 1800-110-430. So without wasting further time, let us welcome Dr. Rawat to the studios and let's get started with the topic. Welcome to the studio, sir.
Thank you. So friends, today I'll be discussing a very important topic in ecology, which is termed as ecosystem development. The other name for this particular process is succession. As the name suggests, succession is basically replacement of one thing by another thing. So before I proceed with this particular topic in ecology, I would like to give an analogy. Consider Delhi. Delhi, as we know today, is being ruled by a combination of Delhi government and central government. But what about 1000 years earlier? What was the scenario of administration at that particular time? And from there on till now. So we know there were a number of rulers and dynasties which ruled Delhi, and each of them got replaced by the succeeding dynasty. For example, about 1000 years ago, Tomars ruled Delhi, the area which we call Delhi today, and it was followed by Chauhans, then slave dynasty, then Tughlaqs, Khaljis, and later on Sayyid dynasty, which was replaced by Lodi dynasty, which was later on replaced by Mughal dynasty. A brief period came in between where Suri dynasty ruled Delhi, which was again followed by Mughals, and then Mughal supremacy started getting weakened, and Marathas took control of most of the part of the Mughal Empire. But later on came Britishers, and they ruled for about 200 years. So the analogy here, basically what I am trying to tell you is that over a given period of time in Delhi, like we see one dynasty is getting replaced by another, it is because of misadministration of the kings or some brute force which is coming from outside. So the change which is occurring might be because of some internal factor, or some external factor might be responsible for this particular change. Similarly, in various ecosystems, we find that communities occur in space and in time. In time, a given assemblage of species which form a community is replaced by another assemblage of species. And why does this happen? This I am going to discuss today, why a particular assemblage of species get replaced in a period of over a period of time by another assemblage of species. What are the factors involved here, and what are the basic fine points of this particular process? So in this particular lecture I will be discussing about what exactly are the steps which occur in this ecosystem development, which I will be talking about with the name succession. Okay, so these two terms are interchangeable. So what are the different steps which occur in succession? What are the causes of succession, and what are the mechanisms of succession? I will also be discussing about the role of disturbance, the role which disturbance plays in replacing one community by another community. So at the end of this lecture, we should be able to tell about what are the different facets or various aspects of succession as applies to natural communities. So first, if we look at this particular panel, we see that there is a picture here which is of a forest. If we suppose I am a surveyor and my task is to survey different climatic regions or different zones of vegetation on earth, and I come across a community which is dominated by forest, and there are small trees and grasses also present in this community. Then I go to another area and I find that this community is not dominated by forest, instead it is dominated by various types of grass, species of grass. And then I go to third area and I find that it is this particular area is dominated by scrubs and cacti. So these particular communities are existing at a given time in different zones of earth, which is a given because different zones on earth have different climates. So depending on the climate, the vegetation pattern or the vegetational assemblage will be different in different zones. What about a specific area which which I saw earlier, it was covered with grasses most of the part, but later on, say about 20 years afterwards, in this picture it shows 6 years afterwards, but say about 20 years afterwards or 50 years afterwards, if I go to the same area and I find it covered with large number of trees or different kinds of vegetation. So what happened to that particular area in a given duration of time? What were the changes which occurred, or what were the forces which caused that particular area to be dominated by any assemblage of species which was very different from that which was found earlier in that particular area? So that is what I am going to talk about in this particular topic. So if we want to define ecosystem development scientifically or in an ecological perspective, we can say that this particular process of ecosystem development or succession is basically a phenomenon or a process by which an ecological community undergoes more or less orderly and predictable changes following a disturbance or the initial colonization of a new habitat. So the points to be noted here are that this particular change which occurs in the community is more or less orderly. That means we can predict that what particular assemblage of vegetation is going to replace another vegetation in due course of time. So this change which occur will be orderly and it will be predictable. And why does this change occur? This might occur because of a disturbance which occurs in the community, or if a new habitat is formed which was previously unoccupied by any community. So if an existent community undergoes a disturbance which gives an opportunity for other species to come and inhabit that particular place, or a new habitat is formed because of normal processes which I will be discussing later on, then that particular area will also be inhabited by different assemblages of species which will replace each other over due course of time, and we can predict beforehand that what will happen, which community will be replacing which community in the course of time, depending on the region where that particular place is found. So the process of succession, as I've said earlier, it may be initiated in an unoccupied habitat, a habitat which is formed afresh or anew, and or it could be because a disturbance occurs in a pre-established community. Now, how does a new habitat form or unoccupied habitat forms? Like there are various such events which occur on our earth, like there might be a volcanic eruption, and there might be formation of a new island, or there might be formation of a specific place which might be covered with lava flow. There might be earthquakes, there might be landslides, or there might be deposition of sediments, which will all give rise to new habitats which were previously unoccupied by any of the living kind or any of the living species. Or there might be a disturbance which removes a particular area in a community, which makes it devoid of any kind of living form, and then that particular area will come to be colonized by species which are coming from outside. So in both the cases where the habitat is unoccupied and where disturbance occurs, in both the cases this particular process of succession or ecosystem development is bound to take place. Now, what is the role of disturbance in succession? Because I have said that succession occurs in unoccupied habitats, or it occurs in communities which are disturbed. So disturbance plays a significant role in the process of succession. And what exactly is that role? It depends on, first, the type of disturbance, that whether this particular disturbance which occurs in the community, whether it kills the entire living forms or whether it kills only a part of them, and a part is still remaining alive, whether it is very devastating or whether it's not that devastating. So the extent of disturbance, the type of disturbance determines what type of succession pattern will be seen in that particular community. For example, if there is a fire in the grassland, that is a very serious type of disturbance which will kill all the living form above the ground. And a second type of disturbance is if there is too much of rainfall. So that might kill some of the living forms but not all of them. So the type of disturbance which occurs is very important in determining the successional pattern. Secondly is intensity of disturbance. To what extent the community is getting disturbed by that particular disturbance. Suppose if there is too much of rainfall, many of the living forms might get killed. And if there is a flash flood, if there is a cloud burst, it might happen that all the living forms get killed. So the intensity also determines what pattern of succession will occur in that particular community. Third is frequency of disturbance. How frequent are the disturbances which occur in this particular area? That means whether the disturbance are rare event or whether they occur periodically, say 10 years, every 10 years, every year, every 50 years or so. More the disturbance, more will be the community unstable, and that community will not be able to reach its final successional stage, which is also termed as climax stage. So depending on the frequency, we can predict how long will it take for that particular community to reach its final stable state. Then the scale of disturbance, whether the disturbance covers a very large portion of the community or a very small portion of the community. For example, if there is an epidemic, whether it covers 1000 square kilometer of a forest or only 2 square kilometer of a forest. So that will determine how the successional pattern will take place in that given area. Also, what exactly is the community structure at the time of disturbance, whether the disturbance occurs when the community is in the stable state or whether the disturbance occurs when the community is in initial stages of succession. If it occurs in the later stages of succession, it is more or less likely that community will not be disturbed too much. But if it occurs in the initial stages, it might happen that all the individuals are wiped out by that particular disturbance. So as we see disturbance and the types, intensity, frequency, scale, and the timing when the disturbance occurs, they are very important determinants of defining the successional pattern and how the successional stages are affected by that particular disturbance. Moving on further, when we say that there is disturbance, basically we refer to some outside agency which is affecting that particular community. But when there are living beings in a community, they might themselves affect their physical environment by various types of interaction which occur between the individuals of the species, and also the interaction which occur between the living forms and the abiotic environment. So the modification of physical environment by the community and the various interaction which occur between the different individuals of different species will lead to change in the community composition. So physical environment also does play a role, and it often determines the pattern and rate of change. So basically I have talked about disturbance, but the environment which is in which that particular community exists, that also plays an important role in deciding the course of succession, and it is the one which it might determine the rate at which the community changes occur. So this particular pattern of one community getting replaced by another assemblage of species or another community is termed as relay floristic. This was a term given by Egler, and it basically means that each group of a species will invade a site at a certain stage of ecosystem development, and over time the group which has invaded and colonized itself in that particular community, it will make the environmental condition unsuitable for itself. That community, the species which make up that community, they change the environmental condition so that they are no more able to live there. That means they create conditions which are unsuitable for them but suitable for invasion by the next group of species, so that one community gets replaced by another community. So this is termed as relay floristics in the definition of Egler. Then there is another viewpoint also which is termed as initial floristics, and this basically says that all the potential propagules are basically like seeds or spores. All the initial propagules are present in the soil, or they can readily disperse and come to the site, so that all the species nearly are present when the succession is initiated. It means to say that all the individuals, all the propagules which are going to give rise to new individuals, they are already present in the soil. Only things which is different from relay floristic is that they are already present, but they do not grow at at a given time. First there will be species which will come to dominate the site, then they will be followed by another species, and then third species, and so on. For example, in a grassland it might be the case that annuals will be the first one which will grow. These will be replaced by grasses, and then they will be replaced by woody species. So it is basically initial floristic. Again, this was given by Egler. So during this particular process, as each new successive species drops out, a new group of species will come and will replace that particular species and assume predominance. Some other scientists also gave their viewpoint regarding succession. They said, like Drury and Nisbet said, that succession is a process in which plant species are sorted along a gradient of resources. That means different species of plant will come to occupy different regions of the community depending on the resources which are available. And we know that different plants have different requirements. So according to their requirements and according to the availability of resource, these species will come to inhabit different zones of the community, because all of them have a specific optimum for nutrients and light, etc. So the model which was presented by Drury and Nisbet, it basically offered a shift from the vegetation control from succession to be defined as a vegetation control phenomenon, because we already earlier said that the vegetation are going to change the physical environment. So this particular model, it basically digresses from this particular view, and it says that the succession is a process which is based on the properties of individual species rather than vegetation controlling the environment. It is basically dependent on the individual properties, like their requirement, the requirement of nutrition, requirement of light, that will determine how succession is occurring in that particular region. Another scientist, Pickett, he expanded the concept of Drury and Nisbet further, and he said that species replacement in communities during succession occur because of a result of change in competitive winners in a changing environment. That means what he tries to say is that as the environment changes, suppose a nutrient starts decreasing in a given community, nutrient A, the concentration of that particular nutrient starts decreasing in a community A. Earlier species, a given species, suppose species B, was very much able to live in that environment because nutrient A was very much high in concentration. But over time the nutrient A starts decreasing in concentration. So the individuals of species B will no more be able to competitively outcompete another species C, which can thrive when the concentration of nutrient A is very less. So the changing environment, which could be changing light intensities, which could be changing nutrient concentration, it causes one type of species to replace another species. Another very renowned scientist, David Tillman, he also proposed a model of succession, which says that in plant communities succession is driven by a trade-off in competition for nutrients in early succession. That means initially the fight is for nutrient, but in mature communities later on this fight is for light. That means vegetation or trees and plants fight for light in the later communities or the climax stages, whereas in the earlier stages the fight is basically for nutrients, and the individuals which are able to live or which are able to survive in low quantity of nutrients, they will be succeeding in the early stages, whereas the individuals which are very tall, which can take in most of the light, they will succeed in the later stages. Now, what are the different causes of succession? How does succession come into being? The causes can be divided into initiating causes, continuing causes, and stabilizing causes. What are these different causes? Initiating causes are the causes basically which start or initiate the process of succession, and these causes could be climatic as well as biotic. Climatic phenomenon like drought, less of rain, too much of rain, they might create an opportunity where there is no create an area where there are no living beings, and then succession can start there. Biotic causes could be overgrazing, spread of an epidemic, humans interference, and this again could create an area devoid of any living form. Again, that particular area will be subjected to succession. What about continuing causes? Continuing causes are the causes which cause establishment of species. Now, as I said earlier, that climatic and biotic causes might lead to formation of area devoid of any vegetation. Now what will happen to that particular area? Only when new species come to that particular area will there be a process of succession taking place. For the new species to come there, they have to migrate, they have to immigrate from outside that particular zone. So the first cause will be first step would be migration of species from outside area to that particular area, and then there will be establishment. The species must establish themselves and reproduce to produce new individuals. So this will be termed as aggregation, formation of new individuals and increase in the population. Third, there will be competition among the individuals if there is only one species, and there will be interspecific competition if there are more than one species coming to that particular area. Then the third type of cause are stabilizing causes. These are the causes which will help in stabilizing that particular community or the assemblage of species in that particular region, and mostly the cause which stabilizes a community in a given region is climate. Now what are the different steps which occur in succession? The first step which occurs is nudation, which I will be discussing in detail some point afterwards. Invasion, competition and coaction, reaction and stabilization. So what exactly is nudation? Nudation is basically development of a bare area without any life form due to catastrophic events. Now what are these catastrophic events? These could be earthquakes, landslide, floods, or these could be volcanic eruption. So the basic outcome of nudation is that an area is created which does not have any life form, and as I have already said, topographic factors might be responsible: soil erosion, climatic factors, too much of rain, too much of drought, or biotic factors, too much of grazing, human interference. All these are responsible for creation of areas devoid of any life. So what happens once an area is created which is devoid of any life? Then what will be the outcome? It will give rise to an area which is like free for all, for the species which can come and reside there. So this particular area will be invaded by species of different types. It's not necessary that all the species which invade a given area they are able to survive there. Only the species which are suited to that particular region or that particular climate, that particular topography, only they will be able to survive. So invasion basically is successful establishment of species in a given area which have migrated from outside that particular area. So these species are basically coming to that particular site from some other area, and only when they establish themselves they will be able to reproduce new individuals of their own species. So there has to be a migration of species from outside region. There has to be establishment of those particular species which are coming from outside, and then there has to be aggregation. That means their numbers must increase. For any species to establish itself, it must adapt to that particular topography, soil type and climate, and then only it will be able to reproduce and produce more of its own kinds. So the migration can this particular process of migration, this could occur with the help of wind or air, where seeds or spores of different species are brought to the bare area carried by wind or air or water also. Then establishment occurs only if the species is suitable for that particular environment, and this process is also goes by the name of accesses. And once the establishment of species occur, there is an aggregation. That means the number of individuals starts increasing for that particular species. Then when the different species have established themselves, there is bound to be competition between individuals of the same species, intraspecific competition, or if there are more than one species, then there is bound to be interspecific competition, that is competition between individuals of different species. And this leads to affecting of life of species amongst each other, and when that happens there is reaction. The organism modify their environment in some way or another, because there is competition between individuals, and more organisms are coming to live in that particular region. So the environment is basically modified from what it was earlier, and over a long period of time there will be sufficient modification of the environment for the species to get replaced by some other species assemblage. Once this happens, this process will keep on occurring till a stabilized community is formed, which is more or less stabilized for the given environment, and this takes place in stages. And this particular stabilized community is called stabilized if only it stays there for a long period of time. That means it is not replaced by some other community or some other assemblage of species. So this is the end result of the successional process, that a stabilized community is formed in that particular bare area. So this particular stabilized community is termed as Climax community, and this term was given by Clements in the year 1916. So what are the different mechanisms of succession? Three mechanisms have been proposed by different scientists, and these are facilitation, tolerance and inhibition. That means what are the underlying processes which lead to succession in a given community? First is facilitation. Connell and Slater gave these terms, and the first is facilitation. Facilitation basically pertains to colonists which prepare environment for later successional species. As I have discussed earlier, that individuals or species modify their environment, and they themselves are excluded from that particular environment, and new species come and reside therein. So this is facilitation. That means modification of environment by a group of species residing at in a given area at a given time, so that it facilitates coming in of another set of species and establishing themselves there. So it is mostly usually associated with primary succession, that I will be talking about in next part, and it also is basically a relay floristics, which I have already discussed earlier. Second process is tolerance. That means modifications which are being produced by the early species on the environment, they neither increase nor decrease the rate of recruitment and growth of the later successional species. So what does that exactly mean? It means that species which have come to reside in a particular area, though they are modifying their environment, this change in the environment, it neither facilitates incursion or invasion of the next set of species, neither does it reduces their invasion and establishment in that particular environment. So it is termed as tolerance. Species sequence is basically a function of life history. That means species come and establish themselves in that particular region. Okay. And third is tolerance. So what exactly tolerance is? Basically it is it says that species tolerance I have already discussed. Inhibition, it basically tells that species inhibit other species individuals to come in that particular area and residing in that particular area for a long period of time, and it is basically driven by negative interactions. So we can study succession by a number of processes. We can establish microcosm to study these processes. We can study natural plot, but the study should be for a very long duration of time, for at least 50 years. We can use photographs for studying the changes which are taking place in a given region, or we can study chronosequences, which are basically different communities existing in the same time but at different zones. So these are various methods by which we can study succession and find out how this process takes place in a given region. So that will be all for this particular session. Thank you.
Thank you, sir. Dear friends, here we come to the half part of this lecture, and we will be continuing this lecture after a really short break. But before going to break, let me remind you that if you have any questions regarding this ongoing session, you can call us on our toll-free number, and for that please write down our toll-free number, that is 1800110430. So we'll be meeting after a really short break. Stay tuned. Welcome back, friends. We are taking the topic ecosystem development, and let's get started with the topic. So please continue.
Thank you. So friends, I left in somewhere in middle of this particular topic, which is termed as ecosystem development, and by now you must be getting a hang of what exactly it means, what exactly is the succession, how communities are getting replaced by one another, and why that happens, why an assemblage of species is getting replaced by another assemblage of species. So continuing further with this particular topic, what are the different types of succession which we know of? There are basically categorized into two types: primary succession and secondary succession, based on from where the succession starts. That means at what site does the establishment of species take place. So if we talk of primary succession, it is basically development of an ecosystem in an area which never had a community living within it. So it's basically will be occurring in areas or lands which are devoid of any life forms. Like suppose a glacier melts and it leaves in its wake the sediment, and if certain species come and start residing there or start growing there, then it will be termed as primary succession. And if suppose there is a volcanic eruption and an island is formed, again species come and start residing there, and there is a series of changes of community, then it will be termed as primary succession. So this particular panel shows there is a hard rocky area which is basically formed by lava flow, and here we can see plants. So here what is occurring is primary succession, because plants are growing in a region where there was no life form earlier. As opposed to it is secondary succession. As the name suggests, secondary, that means this particular type of succession occurs, or this is a series of changes which occur in a place which was previously colonized. Previously colonized means there were life forms living in that particular place, but somehow they got disturbed, or there was disturbance of such great magnitude that it caused death of all the life forms. So if succession occurs in that particular region, then it will be termed as secondary succession. Now all the areas which have been cleared of vegetation because of human interference or destructive events like fires, they will undergo secondary succession. A study was done on the aspect of secondary succession by a scientist known as Catherine Kiever in the year 1950, and she studied an area or an old field which was earlier used for agriculture, but later on it was left fallow. So what series of changes occurred in the vegetation community she studied for a given specific amount of time. So she observed that first of all, horseweed dominated field 1 year after the abandonment. That means when the field was left fallow, after within 1 year, horseweed species came to reside or came to dominate the entire field. Later on in second year, another species, that is white aster, outcompeted horseweed and covered the entire field, and later on in the third year, broom sedge came in and outcompeted the white aster species and dominated the entire region. So what exactly this is telling us is that different species will come, they will come and they will start establishing themselves in a given region depending on the suitable condition. So what exactly she found out after her study is that the life history strategies of individual species, like the dispersal of seed, like allelopathy, that which basically means plants producing chemicals which hinders or which inhibit growth of other plants, and the interaction which are basically competitive interaction between the species, this led to a predictable pattern of succession in this particular area. Usually when primary succession occurs, the stages the establishment of species a long duration of time, because the species have to come and establish themselves in an area where there is no organic nutrients. All the minerals and nutrients are basically trapped in rocks or forms which cannot be directly utilized by plants. So it requires long duration of time as compared to secondary succession, which when occurs it requires shorter duration, because there is already organic material or organic mass present in that particular site. So this particular panel shows how this particular study occurred. There was a cropland which was left fallow, then horseweed came, and then white aster dominated the area, which was later replaced by broom sedge. This replacement of one species by another also occurs in primary succession, but it occurs faster in secondary succession. Coming to another type of succession, as we see in this particular panel here, there are specific patches found in the forest. What are these patches? These patches have been created due to some disturbance. Might be there was some storm which felled very tall trees. Might be there was an attack by a specific fungus or bacteria which killed trees in that particular area. So here are created gaps in the forest. What will happen to these gaps? Now these gaps will be filled by vegetational species which might be residing in that particular region, or they might be filled by species which have not been able to dominate the entire region, but because now a separate area or a free area is available, now second type of species might come and live in this particular area. So this is termed as gap phase succession, because herein you will find in patches there will be a new age class which has developed recently from the seeds which are already present in the forest floor. Now these seeds could be belonging to the dominant species present in that particular region, or these seeds could be of species which are not dominant but which might be present in the adjacent region of the community. Then there is another type of succession which is basically cyclical succession. Now cyclical succession is basically, it occurs in an environment where there are cyclical disturbances, and by cyclical disturbances we mean that disturbances occur frequently in a given specific span of time. Suppose every 20 years there is a fire, every 10 years there is a flood. So this is basically cyclical disturbance. So the regions which are faced by cyclical succession, they are rarely able to reach their stable climax community if the frequency of disturbance is very high. Like if grasslands are there, and in grasslands we know that they accumulate moist grasslands accumulate litter, that is organic matter. So after a certain period of time there might be accumulation of such a large amount of organic matter that fires will occur in these grasslands. So many grasslands undergo such cyclical disturbances, and this causes these particular regions to not ever reach their stable climax community. These particular type of communities or ecosystems are also termed as perturbation dependent ecosystem, because they are used to these disturbances. Now all these succession, whether they are cyclical or whether they are secondary, primary or gap phased, they will terminate in a stable community which is more or less stable in that particular environment, and that will be termed as stable or climax community. Now it is this particular community is, I said, it's more or less stable, it's not in equilibrium with the environment. It is more or less stable for a given amount of time, but if the environment changes, then that particular community will be replaced by other assemblage of species. So the term climax community, as I've told earlier, was given by Clement, and he was basically of the idea that this climax community is in itself is a unit. That means all the species of plant and animals which are living in a given climax community, they basically respond to the climate type, and they have come to reside there because they are suitable for that particular climate. He also suggested that this particular community is very stable. That means this community will not be changed over a period of time if the climate remains stable. And then his third observation was that this community is a superorganism. That means all the species come together, similar to the birth being given by an organism. All the species grow and then mature, which is akin to any organism, a living organism. But this, of course, this view was faulty. The superorganism concept basically says that in each stage of the succession there is a close knit group of species which are living together and they behave as a superorganism. But this is contrary to the individualistic concept of succession, which basically says that species being together at a given place and given time, that is just fortuitous. That means it is basically a chance event. It is not because they are part of a superorganism that they are together. So whereas Clement says that all the species are basically different parts of a superorganism. This individualistic views says that these species are not part of superorganism, they are just being together because of a chance event and because they are able to survive in that particular climate. So this superorganism concept was opposed by scientist Henry Gleason, and he gave the individualistic concept where he said that it is just a chance event that all the species are coming to reside together in a given region. But more or less theoretically, this community, which is termed as climax or stable community, it's more or less in equilibrium with the physical environment as long as the environment doesn't change. If there is a minor change in environment, there might not be appreciable change in the species composition, but if there is a major change in the environment of a given region, then there will be appreciable change in the species composition of that particular region. So we say that this particular stage of succession is stable, and it is because of the environment. So we now we know that climate is the most important determinant which helps in stabilization of a climax community. So for any given region, a community comes to be a stable community only when it is in equilibrium with the climate of that particular region, and this is basically defined as monoclimax theory or stable climax theory or climatic climax theory, which was given by a prominent scientist. Now there was another scientist, Coles, who argued that equilibrium state is never reached and it is a variable approaching a variable. So what we call a stable community, it can never be in equilibrium with the environment because it itself is a variable entity, because species composition can keep on changing, and this particular composition is itself approaching a variable because there cannot be any equilibrium with between any community and its environment, and which of course is true, because we have found that in a given climate there might occur different climax communities, but that depends on the pioneer stages and the later stages. What were the pioneer stages? That will determine what are the later stages which are going to occur in that particular region. Also some other factors are there which I will be talking about, which determine what type of stable community is formed in a given climatic region. Now in a given climatic region, as I have said earlier, there might occur different climax community. They might be because of difference in soil, because of difference in topography, difference in microclimate, or difference in other factors. Also it might be because of difference in the pioneer species which came and established themselves in that particular region. And this particular aspect is termed as polyclimax theory. That means a given climatic region, it's not necessary that a given climatic region will be having all the communities which will be having similar assemblages of species. In a given climatic region, there might be a number of communities or number of ecosystem which might be having different assemblages of species dependent on a number of factors like topography, soil type, and which species came first in. So this is termed as polyclimax theory, which was given by Tansley, and this is the view which is accepted by most of the ecologists nowadays, that a given climatic region can have more than one type of stable or the final climatic conditions. Now the factors which decide this are edaphic factors, that is soil type, topographic factors. Suppose there is a given region and adjacent areas have different soil type. So one soil type might support very tall trees, whereas the adjacent soil type cannot support such tall trees because the soil cover is very thin. It will support only small trees. So these two communities, though they are in the same climatic region, they are having different assemblages of species. Similarly, topographic factors. If there is a community which is facing toward the windward side in a mountain and another community which is facing toward the downward or leeward side in the mountain, the windward side will be having much different species assemblage as compared to the side which is in the side which is on the leeward side. That will be having much more different species assemblage. Then there is biotic factors. Different biotic factors like human beings and their domestic animals, they will determine which type of climax community is occurring in that particular region. So human might intervene, and the final species which come to be established in that particular region might be very different from what it should be for that particular climatic region. For these type of communities, a special name is given which is termed as this climax. Now that particular biotic community is basically not a climatic or edaphic climax at a given site, but it is maintained there because of human beings or their domestic animals, and this is basically anthropogenic climax. So what should be the climatic community, the climax community in that particular region? It never comes into existence because humans keep on intervening. They do not let that successional stage to transit from that particular stage to final climatic climax stage, or there might be a large number of domestic animals which also which are responsible for the climatic climax not to occur. So this is termed as disc climax, and like for example, overgrazing by domestic animals may convert a grassland to desert. So the climatic climax for that particular region was grassland, but because of overgrazing by the cattle, it has been converted to desert, and this is a type of disc climax for that particular region. Now, as I have already discussed, the changes which are being brought about in the community, the generation might be within the community. That is autogenic succession. That means individuals or the species, they cause change in their environment themselves, so that they are themselves excluded from that particular region. So this type of succession is basically termed as autogenic succession, whereas there might be input from outside, like there might be fire, there might be volcanic eruption, there might be a disease. So there are outside inputs or effects which control the community composition, and then in that particular case it is termed as allogenic succession. So here we see that the community might itself cause for its replacement, whereas there might be inputs from outside which cause the replacement of that particular community. In most of the communities, both the factors are occurring simultaneously. There are autogenic factors as well as allogenic factors which cause replacement of one stage by another stage in the given successional series. Now, when we tend to define what exactly are the stages which are occurring in a given successional series, we say that all the sequence of communities which replace one another in a given area in a given course of time, it is termed as SERE. S-E-R-E is the spelling for all the communities which occur in that particular area. The transitory communities which occur at some stage of the succession, they are termed as seral stages or developmental stages, and they replace each other until a stable or final or climax stage is established in the given region. The initial seral stage is termed as pioneer stage. That means all the species which come and reside in a given region for the first time, they will be the pioneer stages, and the species which are coming in the last or which are occurring in the climax stages, they will be termed as climax species. In most of the cases where there is autotrophic succession, that means where there is growing of plants, succession always begins with P is greater than R. That means production is greater than respiration. But there might be cases where there is too much of organic matter. There must be sewage or sludges. There's too much of organic matter. Therein, there won't be any growth of plants. Instead, the organic matter will be acted upon by microorganisms which degrade that particular organic matter. So in those particular cases, P will be less than R. That means production will be less than respiration, because most of the matter will be degraded by the microorganism, and respiration will be quite high. Now, there are certain models which have been developed for describing the ecosystem development, and these are system models, energy flow models, and P by R maintenance model. The system model basically points out that in a given developing system, there will be continuous autogenic inputs from within the system, and there will be allogenic outputs from outside the system which will be periodic, and this will cause changes in the stages of the ecosystem, ultimately leading to formation of a climax community. Then there is energy flow model, which says that in young developing ecosystem, the energy flow is mostly for growth production. That means most of the energy is diverted towards growth because there is less of biomass, and very less is diverted towards maintenance or respiration. Whereas in the final stages, of ecosystem, that's mature stages, most of the energy will be transferred towards maintenance and very less will be transferred toward growth, because there is too much of biomass here which has to be supported and maintained. Therefore, most of the energy will be transferred for maintaining that biomass and very less will be going towards production. Then there is PER maintenance model, which again tells the same thing, that in the initial stages of the succession, the gross production is much more higher as compared to respiration, but in later stages the gross production and respiration is almost equal to 1. That means gross production balances respiration in the later stages of succession. P by R almost becomes 1. And during this phase only there is accumulation of biomass from the pioneer stages to mature stages. Now, there were scientists Odom and Pinkerton who pointed out that succession basically involves a shift in energy flows. So, it is better to talk about successional stages in terms of energy flows rather than assemblages of species, because assemblages of species might vary from one region to another region in the same climatic region also. So, it is better if we talk in terms of energy flow. And some parameters have been discussed. These parameters have been we can discuss these parameters when we talk about different stages of succession. Now, gross production, it increases during the early stages of primary succession, whereas it balances respiration in the later stages. So, in net community production of a given stage, it all decreases towards the later stage of succession, because most of the energy is being transferred towards respiration. And community respiration, it increases from the early stages to final stage, as I have already mentioned. Biomass increases, therefore respiration increases. P by B ratio, that is the production by the biomass which is present in a community, it decreases from the initial to final stages, because biomass increases in the later stages. B by P and B by R ratio again increases from the initial stages to final stages, because most of the biomass is accumulated in the later stages and it is supported by the given rate of production and respiration. Also, the food chains which occur in the given community, the pattern, it changes. There are more linear food chains in the initial communities, but there are much more complex food webs in the later communities, because the number of species invariably increases toward the later stages of the succession. So, from linear food chains it becomes complex food webs in the later stages. Now, the community structure also undergoes a change. There is a rapid change of species number initially, but then it becomes the change is much more gradual. Size of individuals also tend to increase in the later stages. Diversity initially increases, then stabilizes. In the stable stages there is too much of competition, so the diversity decreases, though total biomass does increase in the later stages, and non-living organic matter also increases in the later stages. When we talk of biogeochemical cycle, the mineral cycling becomes more close. The turnover time and storage of essential elements also increases toward the later stages, and there is too much of internal cycling and storing and reutilization of the nutrients by the individuals in later stages, and conservation of nutrient increases toward the later stages. When we talk of natural selection and regulation, we see that the growth forms in the initial stages are more of R selected. That means they are more towards reproduction, whereas in the later stages they are more towards stabilization and they are more towards K selection. Less of reproduction occurs, and these individuals are more or less in equilibrium with the surrounding. Also, the life cycle, as we move from initial to later stages, there is more of specialization, the length of life cycle increases and it is much more complex. Also, interaction, there are much more interaction which basically turns towards mutualism. In the later stages, we see that there is more of resistance, because it increases toward the later stages, whereas resilience decreases. Resistance, basically a community resists getting changed, whereas resilience means whenever there is a disturbance, community again forms itself. So, in the later stages resilience is less. If the community is disturbed, it might not regain its original species composition, but it will resist any change which is being forced upon that particular community. So, it is important that we manage succession. Why do we need to manage succession? Because there are number of practical aspects, like restoration of given area. For restoration of given area, we need to know what particular climax community will exist in that particular area, depending on the climate of that region. and whether that particular soil type and nutrient reservoirs will be able to support that particular community in a given area. So we cannot just go blindly in restoring degraded ecosystem. We need to follow certain set pattern. We need to follow the successional stages, what a particular pattern of succession will occur in that particular region for successful restoration. So this particular aspect is very much useful. Also, we need to know which type of invasive species can establish themselves in a given region, because as of now many invasive species are overtaking the entire ecosystem and causing a lot of problem for the resident species. So succession tells us at which stage does the invading species are more likely to establish themselves, and we can counter that particular stage so that these invasive species do not establish themselves. So these are some of the practical aspects of succession which can be utilized in restoring ecosystem and preventing invading species or outside species from overtaking the entire ecosystem in a given region. So that will be all for today's lecture. That will be thanks a lot.
Thank you, sir. Thank you for this informational lecture. Dear friends, I am sure that this lecture must have added to your knowledge of science and ecosystems. We at CEC are always ready with such educational and informational lectures. So stay tuned with us always. Thank you, sir. Thanks once again.